In another lifetime, I worked closely with our first guest, trying to stop our respective leaderships from committing the terrible blunder of invading and occupying Iraq. We both failed miserably, and it is scant consolation that everyone now knows we were right and they were wrong. Neither of us gave up following that failure, but we have had to watch the same blunder apparently endlessly repeated.
One of the arguments made was that the invasion of Iraq would send Islamist extremism cascading around the world. I wonder how that prediction played out.
Scott Ritter, a former US Marine Corps intelligence officer and United Nations weapons inspector, joins us now. Scott, good to see you again. We did fail miserably, and it is scant consolation, and we were right that Islamist fanaticism of the most savage kind would cascade around the world as a direct consequence. And it's cascaded even into our own streets in our own countries. But perhaps in the countries that were invaded, it is at its most virulent. Let's talk first about Afghanistan, if we may. A lot of people thought the Taliban were our enemy, but it turns out now the Taliban are the least of our worries.
We've never understood Afghanistan. I mean, invading a country is never sound policy, especially when there's no legitimate national security reason to do so. But if you're going to invade a country, I think it's incumbent that you understand the nation that you're invading. I mean, why are you invading? What do you hope to achieve? In the case of Afghanistan, we were talking about not just regime change, getting the Taliban removed, but also regional transformation, nation building. We were going to change Afghanistan. The Taliban were evil. The way the Taliban were sold to the American public is these are a bunch of Islamic extremists. These are people who are seeking to impose Sharia law on the poor Afghan people. When the reality is the Taliban was Afghanistan. The Taliban, Talib is short for student. The Taliban were simply Pashtun religious students that took a stand in 1996 against the moral corruption that had taken hold in Afghanistan post-Soviet invasion, post-Civil War. They were called to duty by citizens who said, we're tired of our children, our women being abused by these warlords who simply feel they can set up a roadblock and kidnap people and do horrible things. And so the Taliban started as a response to this, and they mushroomed into a national movement, but it's not a movement of Talib, it's a movement of Pashtun tribal entities. It was a coalition of Pashtun tribal elements that came together. And when we speak about the Taliban, we're really speaking about Pashtun tribal reality. I mean, it is a deeply religious, but also deeply tribal and deeply cultural group of people. We never understood that. And so in getting rid of the Taliban, what we were really doing is getting rid of the Pashtun tribal ethos that held Afghanistan together. And in the struggle since then, where the Taliban, the Pashtun tribes, were seeking to reassert their legitimate authority over their country from a foreign occupier, a vacuum was created, a vacuum of leadership, a vacuum of cultural guidance, a vacuum of religious singularity. And in this vacuum, we get extremism. And what we see coming from that is, of course, what they call the Islamic State of Khorasan province. A group that's really, to be honest, Islamic in name only. If you take a look, I mean, there's been studies made about ISIS that up to 70% of their recruits have no clue what the Quran is.
If everything is relative in life, I wouldn't like to live under the Taliban. Neither would my wife. But I'd rather live under the Taliban than live under ISIS. That being so, should your country and mine not be helping the Taliban government, therefore, to crush this ISIS uprising in their country?
Well, first of all, absolutely. We should be. I'm not going to sit here and sing praises of the Taliban. I mean, I will say this in their defense. When they came into power in 1996, they hadn't a clue what they were doing. They came into power through the vehicle of a civil war, a nation in conflict, a nation that had been in continuous conflict for, at that time, nearly 30 years. And they didn't know how to govern. They had this model of Sharia law, which is, it's basically the original version of Sharia law at the time of the Prophet Muhammad. They're trying to impose that unrealistically on a modern nation state. And there were problems, severe problems. So I'm not going to defend them. But what I will say is this: in the 20 years that your country and my country have occupied that land and gone to war against its people, the Taliban have learned their lesson. They have learned what it takes to govern. They are governing today. There was a shadow government of Taliban in most of the provinces in Afghanistan during the entire time we were there. They've been governing, they've been taxing, and they understand what's needed now to govern effectively in a modern nation state. They're not giving up their Islamic roots, but they are modernizing. These are people who are educated. They understand they need investment, and to get investment, they need to have a world that doesn't reject them, at a whim. The Taliban will succeed if given a chance, but right now they've, again, taken over a nation that's been at war for 40 years, a nation that has been destroyed. The last 20 years been destroyed by your country and my country. We have created corruption. We've poured billions of dollars that have gone into corrupt warlords' pockets. We have destroyed tribal cohesion. So we've created this vacuum in which these nihilists, these violent people who operate in the name of Islam but who aren't Islamists, these ISIS-K people are now thriving. In order to destroy ISIS-K, the Taliban need to have a united nation behind them. They can't have this when we deny them access to their own money. There are billions of dollars today of Afghan sovereign wealth sitting in banks around the world. The Taliban are the legitimate leaders of Afghanistan. They should be able to access this. We also destroyed their country for 20 years. We should be pouring in humanitarian aid in an effort to create stability in Afghanistan, to create good living conditions for the Afghan people whose suffering is largely our responsibility, not the Taliban's responsibility. But we're not doing this because we're sore losers, because we can't handle the fact that these Pashtun tribal elements cleaned our clocks, wiped the field of battle with us.
Now, Scott, let's have a look at Iraq, the country that my husband started off in his introduction. It's been quite a tumultuous and eventful week with an assassination on the prime minister by drone attacks on the back of the recent elections. What's happening there? Are we anticipating a coup?
Well, when you say a coup, I think we can anticipate that there is serious objection inside Iraq today to a system of government that's been imposed on the Iraqi people by an American occupation. Now we can say, well, wait a minute, Scott, it's a Shia government. The Shia majority finally has a say. It's a Shia government that we picked. It's a Shia government handpicked by us. It's a Shia government whose ministries are governed by people that we've bought off. Every single minister in Iraq today is owned by the CIA. I'll say that one more time, just in case that didn't sink in. Every single minister in Iraq today is owned by the CIA, either directly or indirectly. They cannot function without CIA money. That's the reality of the Iraqi government today. Now, there are elements in Iraq that are trying to change this. Well, one of the biggest elements is a Shia group led by Muqtada al-Sadr, an Iraqi Shia, now cleric. He actually achieved, I believe, his mujahid status, there's another term, but he got his degree. He's in the process of developing a following. And some people say that he's in line to replace the Ayatollah Sistani as the most significant religious leader in Iraq today. One would say that that's probably a process that's natural to Iraq. We're against this because we don't control Muqtada al-Sadr. We also don't control the Iranians. The Iranians have a heavy say in what's going on in Iraq today. Maybe they shouldn't. Iraq is a sovereign state. But, Iran suffered, an 8-year war with Iraq where they lost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. They're very concerned about instability in Iraq, and they have a vested interest in ensuring that whatever comes out of the post-Saddam era is a government that will not pose a threat to Iran.
Scott, the tanks are on the street today. The army has moved in. Is the army on the side of this government that you describe as CIA-owned, or is it on the side of change? I'm wondering if revolution is in the air.
The army right now is controlled by the Prime Minister, Kadhimi. And the army is a reflection of the control that the United States has. It's paid for by the United States. Understand that. We pay their salaries. No one else does. We do. In opposition to them are the popular militias. Now, ostensibly, they've been incorporated into the Afghan security structure. But the reality is these were elements that were formed in 2014, 2015, when the army ran away. Never forget that the army, the one we trained, we equipped, we bought, we paid for, ran away from ISIS when they moved in on Mosul. They surrendered vast swaths of Iraqi territory and were threatening Baghdad when Ayatollah Sistani stood up, issued a fatwa calling for the people of Iraq to mobilize. And they mobilized by themselves. They mobilized with the assistance of the Iranian government, but mobilized they did, and they defeated ISIS. People will say, no, the Americans defeated ISIS. No, we came in later. The popular militias saved Iraq. They saved Baghdad. They saved the Middle East from the black flag of Islamic tyranny being raised over even more cities. And we can't handle that because we don't control that. So what's going on right now in Baghdad is a conflict of control. Will Baghdad be controlled by either Iraqi national or Iranian control? And I'm talking about interests, people that have a vested interest in the regional stability of Iraq, or it will continue to be controlled by the United States. Even though we no longer occupy Iraq as we used to, we still occupy Iraq. We have thousands of troops in Iraq, and the Iraqi government cannot exist without the billions of dollars that we pour in to buy them off. The only thing more corrupt than the Afghan government that collapsed as the Taliban took control is the current Iraqi government. They're all bought and paid for by the United States. And what we're seeing right now is genuine frustration. Unfortunately, money talks. And we may actually see a revolution in Iraq today as the people who are beholden to the United States seek to fight the people that are beholden to Iraq. Never forget there was an election in Iraq recently. Kadhimi didn't win. Muqtada al-Sadr won. And they're resisting him taking power. They're resisting democracy. Never forget that. What's going on in Iraq today is the United States of America and its CIA bought and paid for stooges are in opposition to democracy.
Our time together in Iraq seems so long ago as you paint that picture. Scott Ritter, thanks for joining us on board the Sputnik.
Thanks for having me.